Hey traders, Raghee here. Let's get a quick audio and video check in. Should be good to go. All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope everyone is doing great. So we are just 2 days, well, including today, right? We're just 2 days away from OpX. And I did a video yesterday on on 4 setups that I really like. I mean, we'll look at a whole lot more than that here in the Sector Secrets Mastery Room. But the process I shared with you all in the top tier outlook. So that's a good, if you want to print that out, it's a step-by-step of what I'm looking for specifically on the 3rd Friday of the month, which is what we're dealing with this week for sure. And then yesterday's video will give you a good complement to the update in the top tier if you haven't checked that out yet. All right. So let's get into what we're dealing with here this morning. And you'll see there on the left side, we've got the notes running. So let's take a look at what's going on intraday. We had FOMC barking at 8 a.m. this morning. So what I want to do is just look at 8 o'clock, and you'll see in the aftermath of barking, whether you want to credit barking with that move or not, that was the event that preceded the move. So there's a pretty good chance some of that's going to be, a Barkin related move. I don't need to know what Barkin said or any of the Fed members for that matter. But what I do want to know is what happened after whatever was said. What was the price action? Probably the most dominant speaker is not on the calendar today, and that's Treasury Secretary Bessent. And that's been a ongoing, I'd say, pre-8 o'clock bit of news, right? In terms of all the different things, mostly the Fed chair. So there is that. And again, not much in terms of pre-market other than Bessent and Barkin. And then we're going to go into 10:30 a.m. crude oil inventories, 11:15 a.m. the president speaking, FOMC. So we've got plenty of Fed speak coming up throughout the morning. All right, what else do we have going on here today? We've got the September 17. So let's head on over to our FOMC Fed Watch. So September 17 rate cuts are fully discounted. I mean, it's 99.9%. Anything above 80, right? Anything above 80 would be considered a fully discounted expectation, but this is sitting at 99%. If the Federal Reserve has no intention of cutting, they're going to have to get to some serious messaging here very soon, because we've got basically a month before right now the strength in the market, the strength in bonds, things are moving with this expectation. So there's a couple things they can do. Either they're going to talk it down during Jackson Hole, or some of the sporadic FOMC speakers, whether that was Goolsbee coming up, Goolsbee and Bostic, or whether that was Barkin, they're going to start to adjust expectations. And we're certainly not seeing that yet. The only thing that's the wild card is drama, right? The only thing that's really we're having to deal with is the obviously Fed chair drama. Yesterday we saw the sell-off based on the whole Federal Reserve building renovation. That quick sell-off we saw yesterday morning was obviously rumor, soundbite, scuttlebutt about that. But anything around the Fed chair has been creating a lot of volatility in the broader averages, the indices. We saw that quickly before they took off. And then obviously Europe, Russia, China. I say they're wild cards because there's no way to time that, right? There's no way to say that this is the time that the news is going to be released. This is going to be the outcome of it. So that's going to be pretty difficult. That's going to be pretty difficult in that regard. All right. Bear with me one moment here. All right, so then we get into, again, the Fed speak coming. Right now, we've got Russell, Dow, S&P, Nas, all above the previous session close. PSC just stands for previous session close. And being above that level, it's a line in the sand, right? As I like to call it, line in the sand. And all that means is that it's a sentiment level, all right? It's a sentiment level. So ultimately, what we want to remember, if we've got this line in the sand, if we've got this sentiment level that we're dealing with, above it, I'd rather be a buyer of calls or a buyer of the underlying futures contract. And below it, I'm going to be a little bit more bearish. And one of the big takeaways yesterday, for those of you that were with me in the mastery and we were taking a look at yesterday's trades, you can see just how difficult it is for a stock, for an ETF, for a futures contract. We can see how difficult that is for something to climb when it's got that PSC, that line in the sand, sitting above it. So that's a really easy filter. Now, I don't mind sometimes putting on trades like that. I'm going to adjust position size. We're going to have a tighter stop in those instances. But really, ultimately, what we want to remember is that we can see that it's working so much harder. So we'll get into a little bit of that here this morning. All right, so let me go ahead and let's take a look at some of the indices. I'm going to let the pup back in the office here. We got the pup indicator going on. Come on, pup. Good girl, some water. All right, the pup indicator is always a good indicator to have for the morning. All right, so let's take a look at the. So we got through the notes. By the way, later on today, I will send out the bracketing instructions for Google and RTX. Those are expiring this Friday. Of course, they're going to be subjected to the same OpX gravitational pull that I've been teaching you all. Wherever there is a high amount of open interest, what's the probability that we could pull back in those names? I'm not as concerned with Schwab and BKR. Those expire September 19, but we have to get out of those two winners, Google and RTX. We've scaled out of Google twice. We've scaled out of RTX once. So both of those are profitable trades that now we're managing, now at this point, unrealized profit. So I'll be sending those out. But the open swings remain Google, BKR, Schwab, and RTX. BKR has been hanging on by a thread, and we're really going to have to see what crude oil and crude oil inventories might do as we go through today. And look, if BKR gets stopped out, remember, it's a 15% stop loss now. So I updated BKR to remind everybody, once we are looking at a trend that is no longer up, it's moved to bullish chop, as RTX has, we adjust our stop. That's it, right? Our expectation for follow through becomes a little bit less. We had, I had, and I think many of you did too, had two entries on BKR, one for the moderate, one from the conservative. I had to cut the moderate, and that's okay, right? The conservative's hanging on by a thread, so I'll continue to manage that position. So as we get ready to scan for some day trading setups, and we have the bell, it's going to ring here in about 90 seconds. Let's take a look at what we've got. RTX might be as good as anything looks here this morning, because when I take a look at the overnight levels, the previous session close, the proximity of the previous session close to the green zone, the support of the hourly price movement range, is pretty darn close. So that would make for a pretty good level, not great, but a pretty good level for long IWM calls or long RTY mini or micro futures. Yeah, so that's one thing we're going to be keeping an eye on. Now, everything else, let's jump on over to the NAS, for example. Everything else is going to have to break, right? It's going to have to break that previous session close. You can see here 23,949.5 right there. Everything else is going to have to break that level before it gets to the support of the hourly price movement range, which is not ideal because this level is support when price is above it, but it becomes resistance when price is below it. So it becomes an obstacle. And remember, the market can only move from obstacle to obstacle. The market can only move through levels that are in its way, right? So if that level is in the way, this would be selling pressure until we get above it. And then that old saying of what was once support becomes resistance, right, becomes applicable. All right, so let's move on to, and that was the bell, by the way. I don't know if you could hear that here on my desk. I tried to turn down the volume on those speakers. All right, so that's the bell, and I absolutely would expect candles of unusual size on the open, candles that are larger than the last 25 to 30 minutes in terms of range per 5-minute candle. So we know we're going to get those candles on the open, and this is why I want to wait, right? I always want to wait at least 5 to 10 minutes, right? 5 to 10 minutes before setting up anything, right? Before I trigger any trade. And then, there's some really cool old school timing. So, whether there's a lot of people that have talked about the morning rhythm. We haven't talked about this in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about the morning rhythm and what we're dealing with. The first 5 minutes, right? The first 5 minutes is really a lot of volatility, that candle of unusual size. And we're waiting for spreads to normalize. We're waiting for the volume to come in, right? Volume's coming in. And then after that, right, the first 5 minutes, then we get to, I would say, the next 10 minutes, right? So that would take us from 9:35 to 9:45 a.m. And, this is when we can start looking at, our price is still above the previous session close. Are we developing or losing trends? Now you'll notice the ES and the NQ have trends here this morning. And I would love to see those trends persist into that 9:35 to 9:45. Right? At 10 a.m., the clearing period, the clearing range has set, and the clearing period has ended. The clearing is basically that volatility that we see in the first 30 minutes as pending orders are sort of cleared out, right? Hence the clearing period. So it usually does merit waiting about 5 to 10 minutes, up to 15. As you can see with that next 10-minute, what I'm thinking about is, our trends, pre-market trends, still intact, right? Have certain trends formed? Are we making new highs? Are we making new lows? Right? So these are just kind of a morning rhythm, right? The morning 9:30 to 10 a.m. clearing range rhythm that we all just have to deal with, every day. So waiting is never a bad thing. Some traders will wait till at least 9:35. Other traders will wait to about 9:45. Others will wait till the clearing period has completed. It's not a right or wrong, it's just a preference, right? So here I know at 9:33, still a little early, but ES and NQ have uptrends, right? That's what I know right now. What else? Well, there was an uptrend in crude oil, and the first 10 minutes, or the last 10 minutes, right? The 9:25 and the 9:30 candle have shook those loose, right? So you can see there's a pre-market uptrend, but now it's neutral. And that's why it's so important to at least watch those first 5 to 15 minutes on the morning. Another thing to note is gold has a downtrend. Let's go take a look at that. So these are all the things that in the first 5 to 10 minutes, up to 15, that I'm making note of. So GC, we have a downtrend. How do I know that? Take a look at the color of the 2 rows at the bottom of my screen. This is the multi-structure. That magenta over magenta tells me that we have not only bearish momentum, that's the top row, but a bearish trend. That's the bottom row. All right, so gold is in a downtrend. And then really everything else is pretty neutral. A couple other things we could keep an eye on here at 9:34 is which sectors have trends, right? So I can see right now XLY, XLV, XLU. at the moment have uptrends. And the question will be, hey, by 9:45, are these persisting? If they are, those would be great candidates for potential day trades, right? Now, getting into trades, whether that be swings before 10:30 a.m. or whether that be day trades before 9:40, 9:45 a.m., they become lower probability because of the kind of volatility that we're dealing with this morning 9:30 to 10 a.m. rhythm. Yes, but I can make notes of things that are moving in such a way that, for example, ES and NQ could be great on a pullback. XLY, XLV, XLU. Well, for XLY, we'll take a look at things like Amazon. We'll take a look at names like Tesla and even Home Depot. Those are the top weighted names in that sector. For healthcare, we'll see what's up with stocks like Johnson and Johnson, Abbott, AbbVie. Right? Those are names that could be, in addition to the ETF itself, opportunities. With utilities, we'll take a look at things like Southern and Duke, Dominion. VST has been one on the radar. CEG has been another one on that radar. So we'll take a look at names like that. Right. So we start to have a top-down view. Right. What are the indices doing? And above the previous session close, they're bullish. Which indices are strong? And believe me, the Dow isn't weak today. I'm not omitting the Dow, but relative strength relative to the NASDAQ and the S&P, you'll notice plenty of bullish momentum in the Dow, but no trend yet. So the bullish momentum is green, but the trend is gray, and that's where we don't have a trend. But it's far from being bearish. And if the Dow is up, we're going to see likely certain sectors benefit. It could be financials, it could be industrials. So if the Dow is up, we can take a look at things like XLF, etc. But the trends are in consumer discretionary. We'll keep an eye on healthcare and utility. So 9:45 becomes a really big time, 9:40 to 9:45. But again, we're laying down the groundwork so that at that moment of time, we're still not scanning everything. We're not still scanning the entire marketplace and all the different sectors. We've narrowed our range down so we can get to work. Now, I want to scroll back up to the hot zones, right? At 11:15, we're going to hear from the president. And then we have 2 FOMC speakers this afternoon. That should, barring any crazy headlines like we got yesterday, right? This whole, we might have a lawsuit against Jerome Powell for the Federal Reserve building renovation. Oh my gosh, that kind of thing is really what upends, the morning, and something new has to be responded to, something that wasn't scheduled. Yeah. Okay. So that's what we've got here, and we'll continue to scan. All right. So just a quick reminder, if we talk about the morning rhythm, what about our morning in terms of how we want to get through the first 2 hours a day and find the best opportunities possible? So we're going to do our pre-morning, pre-market prep, our opening bell intel, if you will. What is it that we're focused on? What's the sentiment? And which ones are bullish, which ones are bearish, right? Bitcoin still above the previous session close. Bonds, gold, NASDAQ, ES, YM, RTY. We know which indices are stronger. I'd love to dive into maybe some NQ and ES names. They do overlap quite a bit. We'll get through our morning, and then we'll start taking a look at our swing trades, especially managing some of our swing trades. All right. Okay. So that's what we've got. And then ultimately, as we start looking at individual stocks, remember, we want to make sure those individual stocks are part of a strong sector. So let's say I'm looking at XLC, certainly bullish, but not in an uptrend like XLY. XLC would also bring up telecommunications. So when XLC is strong, we also want to take a look at IYZ, right? It's gapping up. It's bullish like XLC, but it's not in a trend. But look, if the NASDAQ is strong, that's going to open up things like semiconductors, technology, the awesome 8, if you will. It will open the door up to those. Okay. So those are where we're going to continue to look for opportunity. And look, anything attached to the NASDAQ right now is probably a really good place to look. ES will follow the NAS. I'd like to see more strength in financials. That's going to benefit the Dow and the S&P. So we'll keep an eye on the XLF. But that's where, again, that first 20 minutes of the day, when we go from 9:20 to 9:40, that's going to lay the groundwork for the morning. And that's exactly what we're going to take a look at.